What if everything you believe about God is an illusion? Since the beginning, we have been taught that everything has a start. You are born, time passes. The universe expands, but what about God? If everything needs a creator, then who created God? This question has haunted the greatest philosophers, scientists, and theologians in history. But what if it's the wrong question? What if we are trying to fit God into a logic that simply doesn't apply to him? What if his very existence is something so far beyond our comprehension that we can't even ask the right question? Science tells us that the universe had a beginning. But pay attention. If everything started at a specific moment, what existed before that? Oh, nothing, but nothing creates nothing. So what or who was there before everything? Now get ready, because the answer to this question will not only challenge everything you have ever believed, but it may completely change the way you see God, creation, and even your own purpose. What if everything you believe about God is wrong? Yes, wrong. We have always been told that everything has a beginning, that nothing comes from nothing. But what about God? If everything needs an origin, then who created God, or was he never created? That challenges everything we know. Now think about this. If something never had a beginning, it means there was never a moment when it did not exist. That messes with our minds. You had a beginning, your house had a beginning, the universe itself had a beginning. But what about God? Did he simply always exist? How can that be possible? And more, if he has always existed, where was he before everything began? This question has tormented the greatest minds of humanity. Aristotle said there must be an unmoved mover and eternal being who started it all. But if God was already there, before time and space existed, what was he doing? Did he just sit in darkness for all eternity until he decided to create everything? Or is it that the concept of before simply doesn't make sense? When talking about him now, here's something science also can't explain. The universe had a beginning. The Big Bang was the moment when everything started. But before that, how can something come from nothing? Nothing cannot produce anything. So what was there before everything came into existence? Something greater, something that never had a beginning, because it has always existed. The human mind was not made to understand eternity. Our brain seeks logic, order, a starting point. But what if God is above all that? What if he is not bound by the rules we try to impose on him? That means he cannot be calculated, explained, or fit into any human theory. Does that bother you? It should. Now pay attention. If God has always existed, then he depends on nothing to continue existing. He is the only thing that does not need a creator. This completely changes how we see reality. Because if he has always been, that means before time and space, he was already there. But what was that before? Like what existed before time itself? The answer to this question may completely change your view of God and the universe. And get ready, because what comes next will challenge your perception of reality even more. Now try to imagine something impossible. Imagine opening your eyes and nothing exists. Absolutely nothing. Not a dark space, not an infinite void, nothing. No light, no sound, no existence, no past, no future, no time. But then in the midst of this absolute nothingness, there was God. How can something exist before time itself? This is the question that will break your mind. If there was no time, then there was no before for God. He didn't emerge, didn't begin, didn't wait to exist. He simply already was. But how does that make sense? Our brain hates this idea because we live trapped in time, counting seconds, aging, watching things begin and end. But God does not follow this rule. He was there before any rule existed. Now stop and think. If only God existed, what was he doing? Did he just remain still in nothingness for all eternity? Or was this before something so grand that we can't even imagine it? The problem is that our minds were not made to understand eternity. We are like fish trying to comprehend the entire ocean without leaving the tank. But what if time didn't always exist? Science says that time, space, and matter are inseparable. One can only exist if the others exist too. This means that when God created the universe, he created everything at the same time. There was no before and after for him. But then why did he decide to create? If God was self-sufficient, perfect, and eternal, why bring something into existence that was unnecessary? What motivated him? Now think about the first thing God created: light. But light to illuminate what? There was no sun, no stars. So what was the purpose of this first separation between light and darkness? Could it have a much deeper meaning than we imagine? Something that is not just about the universe, but about our very existence. All of this leads us to an Even more disturbing question. If everything needs a beginning, then who created God? You may think you know the answer, but what comes next might turn your mind upside down. If everything needs a creator, then who created God? This is the question no one dares to ask. If everything has an origin, what was God's origin? What if I told you that this question might be completely wrong? Our brains are trained to seek causes and effects. If something exists, then something before it must have caused it to exist. You were born because your parents were born, who were born because your grandparents were born, and so on. But what about God? If he needed a creator, then who created that creator? And who created the creator of the creator? This line of reasoning would never end. Here's the detail that changes everything. To need a creator, something must have had a beginning. But what if God never had a beginning? What if he simply always existed? I know this blows the mind, but think carefully. If everything that exists had a starting point, then there must be something that was always there, something that never needed to be created. Because it already was. What if God is that something? Now look around you, nothing lasts forever. The universe is wearing out. Stars die, energy dissipates. Everything we know has an expiration date. That means nothing inside the universe can be eternal. So for all of this to exist, there must be something outside of time, something that never began, something that simply is, and science confirms this. The second law of thermodynamics says that the universe is wearing out, wasting useful energy, but if it is degrading, that means it had a starting point. Nothing within the universe can be eternal. So, the only logical explanation is that something eternal and immutable had to give the first push. Now here comes the question that might mess with your mind even more. If God has always existed, what was he doing before creating everything? What was reality like before anything existed? Was he waiting? Had he already created something before? Or perhaps the very concept of before doesn't make sense when we talk about him. If God doesn't need to be created, then he is the only thing that is truly absolute. That means he wasn't just there before everything, but that we only exist because he wanted us to exist. Now the big question, why? What comes next might change your perspective on the creation of the universe and your own existence. The universe had a beginning period. But here's the question no one answers. What existed before that? Science says everything started with a Big Bang. But where did that explosion come from? How can something simply appear out of nothing? Or was it never really nothing to begin with? Think about this. The Big Bang wasn't just an explosion. It was the moment when time, space, and matter simply appeared. But appeared from where? The universe cannot have created itself. Something outside of it had to give the first push. And here's the detail no one talks about. The Big Bang itself points to the necessity of a creator. Now pay attention. If there was no time before the Big Bang, that means time itself began at that moment. What does that mean? That God could not have had a beginning, because beginning is a concept that exists inside time. But he was already there before time existed. That's not just mind-blowing. It changes everything. The truth is that science can only explain how the universe works, but never why. The laws of physics don't create anything. They simply describe what already exists. So if the universe began, who pressed the start button? And more, why? At that exact moment, why not billions of years earlier or later? What determined that specific instant? Here's the craziest part. The very creator of the Big Bang Theory, George Lemaitre, was a priest. He saw no contradiction between science and faith, because one answers how and the other answers why. And now for the wildest twist. Science says that before the universe, there was absolutely nothing, but nothing cannot create something. So what was there before? If the universe had a beginning, then it cannot be eternal. But if it is not eternal, something greater than it must have existed before, something outside of time, something that had no beginning. Because the very concept of beginning does not apply to it, something that simply is. Now here comes the question that might turn your mind upside down. What if science itself is already giving us clues about God, but no one wants to admit it? What if everything is right in front of our eyes, but we've been conditioned not to see it? And the answer to that is even more unsettling than you imagine. What if I told you that the idea of an eternal God is not just a religious belief, but a logical conclusion since the dawn of humanity? Philosophers and theologians have tried to answer a simple but devastating question: if everything has a beginning, what came before the beginning? Think of the great names in philosophy. Aristotle, for example, believed there must be an unmoved mover. something that sets everything in motion. Without needing to be moved, Plato spoke of a world of ideas, a perfect reality far beyond what we can perceive. What do these theories have in common? The notion that something eternal and absolutely necessary must exist. Now, look at the greatest religious traditions in history. Judaism says that God revealed his name to Moses. As I am a declaration of eternal existence, Christianity reaffirms that God is the Alpha and the Omega without beginning or end. Islam declares that God is Allah and Al-Akhir, the first and the last. All these traditions arrive at the same conclusion. God was never created, he has always existed. And here's a detail few people notice. This idea is not a concept invented to explain the unknown, but a logical necessity. If God had a creator, then that creator would also need a creator, and that would lead to an infinite loop. But if something has always existed, then it does not need a beginning, it simply is now. Think about this. Why did all ancient civilizations believe in an eternal, higher power? Peoples who never communicated with each other in different times in history arrived at the same conclusion. From the Egyptians to indigenous tribes, the idea of an eternal creator has always been present. Coincidence, or could this truth be imprinted in the very essence of humanity? But if all these traditions speak of God's eternity, what does that mean for us? If he always exists, then he is not just a distant creator, he is the very foundation of existence. And if that is true, then our own reality depends on him. And this raises an even more disturbing question. Is the logic we use to try to understand God insufficient? We live in a world where everything needs to be proven, explained and calculated, but are there some truths that simply go beyond what human reason can grasp? Does the lack of an explanation mean something does not exist? Or does it mean we are not using the right tools to understand it? Here's the truth. Few people want to admit. Not even science can explain everything. Human consciousness, for example, remains a mystery. How do electrical impulses in the brain create thoughts? How do we know that we exist? And more, why is there something instead of nothing? Science can say how things happen, but it cannot answer the why, and that's where faith comes in. Now think about this. How can we measure something that is beyond our reality? If God is eternal, infinite, and beyond time, it would be like trying to explain the internet to a goldfish. Our logic is trapped within time and matter, but he is not. What if reason itself has limits that only faith can surpass? And here's the detail no one tells you. The greatest minds in history have considered this. Albert Einstein said that science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind. Isaac Newton saw his discoveries as a way to understand God. Even the greatest philosophers knew that in the end, pure reason alone would never explain everything. Now be honest. Do you believe in love? Have you ever seen love? Have you ever touched it? Have you ever measured it? Of course not, but you know it exists. You don't need a laboratory to prove that you feel longing, emotions, or consciousness. So why do we demand physical proof for something that, by definition, is beyond matter? Is faith irrational? Or is it the highest level of reason? Now, if faith and reason are not opposites, but complementary, this raises an even deeper question. How can we truly know God? How can we experience something beyond our understanding? What is beyond our understanding? And could the answer to this question change everything you think about existence? What if I told you that time, space, and matter are inseparable? From the moment of creation, these three elements developed together, as if they were components of a single machine. Now stop and think. If one of them didn't exist, the others couldn't exist either. But what does this mean for the way the universe was created? Science tells us that time, space, and matter emerged simultaneously before time. There was no before space. There was nowhere before matter. There was no what. Now here comes the most unsettling question. If all of this came into existence together, who set the rules of the game? Why do creation happen exactly this way? The Bible describes creation in a simple, yet profound way. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This single verse reveals a powerful principle. Time, beginning, space, heavens and matter, earth emerging together. But this can't be a coincidence. It points to a meticulous design and intelligence beyond our understanding. Now think about nature. Every detail seems interconnected in a way that is almost impossible to be mere chance. The oxygen we breathe depends on trees, which depend on sunlight, which depends on the Earth's exact position in The universe, the balance is so precise that if a single factor were altered, life as we know it simply wouldn't exist. Does this really seem like an accident? And here is the most unsettling point. If time, space, and matter were created together, that means there was a moment when none of them existed. Now the question no one wants to ask. What existed before? What was there before time itself? What was that reality, where nothing had yet been created? Or could that reality have been God himself? If God created everything as an interconnected system, then we are also part of that connection. But this raises an even more intriguing question. If creation has a purpose, what is ours? What comes next? May make you see existence in a completely different way. What if I told you that science has never contradicted God? In fact, it may be pointing directly to him. You were made to believe that science and faith are enemies. But what if that division is just an illusion? What if deep down the greatest scientific discoveries only reinforce the need for a creator? The second law of thermodynamics tells us that the universe is wearing down. Usable energy is depleting. Stars are dying. Everything is moving toward a final conclusion. But here comes the big question. If the universe is deteriorating, then it had a beginning. And if it had a beginning, who or what gave the first push? The Big Bang itself confirms a crucial point. The universe is not eternal. There was a moment when it came into being. A moment when everything began to exist. But then what was there before? Oh, nothing. But nothing cannot create something. So what or who was there before? Now pay attention. The laws of physics are immutable, predictable, constant. But where did these laws come from? Why does the universe follow such well-defined rules? Why do equations work? It makes no sense to expect absolute order from a random cosmic accident. If there are laws, there must be a lawgiver. And what if God is that lawgiver? And here is a detail no one tells you. The fathers of modern science were, for the most part, believers. Isaac Newton, Galileo Galilei, Johannes Kepler, all saw science not as the enemy of faith, but as a way to better understand the mind of the Creator. They saw no contradiction, only purpose. Now, think about this. If science shows us that the universe had a beginning, and that everything in it follows unchanging laws, what does that really mean? Does it point to a creator or the chance? If God created everything, could even the very laws of physics have been intentionally designed? And if in reality the universe was fine-tuned to exist, that leads us to an even greater question. If the universe has a purpose, what is ours? What comes next? May make you question everything you thought you knew about existence. What if everything around you were assigned? What if every detail of existence, from the glow of the stars to the beating of your heart, were proof of the presence of something far greater? You may not see God with your eyes, but what if he has always been revealing himself all along in ways you never noticed? Stop and look at nature. The sun is in the exact position for life to exist. Your body has systems so complex that even science cannot replicate them. The universe follows precise mathematical laws to ensure everything works in perfect harmony. Does all of this really seem like the work of chance? Or could we be surrounded by evidence of a brilliant mind behind it all? The truth is, something simply cannot be proven in the traditional way. But that doesn't mean they aren't real. You've never seen a thought, yet you know they exist. You've never weighed love on a scale, yet you've felt its power. So why do we demand physical evidence for something that goes beyond matter? Now here's the question that might turn your mind inside out. If God has always existed, and if he truly created all of this, what's the purpose? If he made the universe, life, the stars, and even you, what does he want? Were we created just to exist? Or is there something far greater waiting to be discovered? Faith is not blindness. Faith is seeing what logic alone cannot explain. It's not an escape, but a calling to something bigger. The question isn't just, does God exist? But rather, what will you do with that answer? Now look within yourself. What if everything you've heard so far isn't just a theory, but an invitation? A call to discover something far beyond what you've been told. Because the real question isn't whether God exists, but what you will do with that truth. So tell me, what will you do with all of this? Ignore it, pretend you never heard it, or face the truth head on? Because one thing is certain. If God has always existed, then he isn't just a concept. He is the only thing that truly matters. And if that's true, then the question you should be asking isn't who created God, but rather, what does he want from me? Science points to a beginning. Logic demands an eternal cause. The entire History of humanity has always looked to the skies for answers, and now you're here, standing before a question that could change everything. If God has always existed, what is your role in this story? Because if he is real, then nothing, absolutely nothing is a coincidence, not even you hearing this right now. So I ask you, do you really think you're here without reason? That your existence has no greater purpose? Or is it possible that God always knew this moment would come, that you would hear these words and wonder if you're ready to see the truth? If this video resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your perspective. And if you want to keep exploring questions that could change your life, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because after what you've heard today, I doubt you'll ever see things the same way again.